a place where blood becomes a form of entertainment. Rome was not born of mercy. It was raised on war, ambition, and a cold belief that power only mattered when it was displayed. At the heart of that empire, where stone roads converged toward authority, the Roman Colosseum rose not as a place of joy, but as a monument to domination. It was not built for laughter. It was built to teach people how to grow accustomed to death, how to cheer for suffering, and how to call it the glory of Rome. When the Colosseum was first constructed, it did not yet bear that name. The Romans called it the Amphitheatrum Flavium, after the Flavian dynasty. But in the minds of the people, it quickly became something else entirely, the beating heart of Rome. On days of games, the city woke earlier than usual. Streams of people flowed toward the arena, like participants in a collective ritual. Old and young, nobles and slaves alike entered a space where ordinary laws were suspended, and only one rule remained: blood must be spilled. Behind the massive stone walls lay a hidden world meticulously designed to make death efficient and spectacular. Beneath the arena floor stretched a complex underground system like the entrails of a colossal beast. There, gladiators were held in darkness, hearing the roar of the crowd above them like distant thunder. They did not see sunlight, only iron, sweat, and fear. Every footstep on the cold stone brought them closer to the possibility of never returning. Gladiators were not heroes in the romantic sense imagined by later generations. Most were slaves, prisoners of war, condemned criminals, or desperate men with nowhere else to go. They were trained not to live long, but to die well. Every strike, every fall, had to serve the gaze of tens of thousands of spectators. Their lives were measured by the excitement they generated for a blood-hungry crowd. What made the Roman arena truly brutal was not only the number of deaths, but the way death was transformed into a social ritual. Before each match, gladiators paraded around the arena, looking up toward the imperial box. Ave, Caesar, morituri te salutant. Hail, Caesar. Those who are about to die salute you. This was no poetic flourish. It was a literal truth. Their lives depended on a nod, a hand gesture, a fleeting emotional impulse of the ruler. The crowd roared not because it hated the gladiators, but because it needed violence to feel Roman. In an empire too vast, where wars were fought far away at the borders, the arena brought war back to the city center, packaged into scheduled entertainment, with music, ceremony, and spectacle. Romans learned to love their empire by watching others die for it. Humans were not the only victims. Wild beasts from conquered lands, lions from Africa, bears from northern forests, elephants, leopards, tigers were starved, enraged, and released into the arena. These staged hunts, where unarmed men faced savage animals, were among the most popular events. The roars of beasts merged with human screams into a symphony of terror that Rome proudly called civilization. On festival days, the arena became a theater of absolute power. The emperor sat above all others, reminding everyone that he controlled not only life and death, but the emotions of tens of thousands. When he granted mercy, the crowd erupted in joy. When he ordered death, they screamed in ecstasy. Power was no longer abstract, it was public, visible, and drenched in blood. Behind the marble and ceremony, however, the arena was a machine that crushed human beings. Gladiators lived in brutal training schools, treated as property. They were fed well not out of compassion, but because investments had to be preserved until use. Their scars were not signs of suffering, but proof of profitability. Even their deaths were calculated, staged for maximum emotional return. Rome was proud of its arena. It believed it represented order, discipline, and control over chaos. In truth, it exposed Rome's darkest soul, a place where violence was not hidden, but celebrated. A society that could sit for hours watching men and animals tear each other apart did not do so because it was born cruel, but because it had grown accustomed to death, viewed safely from above. And in that familiarity lay the greatest tragedy. The arena did not only kill those who stepped onto the sand, it slowly killed the Empire's capacity for empathy. When cheers drowned out cries of pain, when entertainment was built on suffering, Rome crossed a line from which return would be difficult. The Colosseum became a mirror of the Empire's soul, powerful, disciplined, and hollowed of compassion. And this was only the beginning. If the arena floor was where death was displayed, then behind the massive stone walls lay a quieter hell. There were no cheers there, no sunlight, only damp air, the smell of dried blood, and human beings waiting to be thrown out as entertainment. Rome called gladiators symbols of strength, but Rome never called them human. A gladiator's life began with the loss of identity. Upon entering the training schools, they were shaved, numbered, categorized like livestock. Each was assigned a role: net fighter, shield bearer, heavy armored warrior, or dagger-only combatant. These roles were not designed for fairness, but for drama. Rome did not seek justice, it sought sensation. Training lasted from dawn until sunset. Bodies were beaten until pain became familiar. Gladiators were taught not to follow natural survival instincts. They had to fall beautifully, know when to rise, when to kneel, and await judgment. Even the moment of death had to serve the spectacle. A clumsy death was unacceptable. The trainers Lannister were not noble masters. They were investors. Each gladiator was capital, valuable only if used efficiently. Torture was common, but premature death was bad business. Rome's cruelty lay in this balance. It did not kill quickly. It kept you alive just long enough to continue killing for it. Outside, the crowd neither knew nor cared what happened behind the walls. To them, gladiators were legends. They placed bets, chanted names, cheered for men about to be stabbed through the heart. For a moment, gladiators seemed powerful, capable of moving an entire arena. But it was an illusion. Victory did not mean freedom. It meant survival once more. Wounds never fully healed. Pain became constant. At night, in cramped cells, prayers echoed. Some prayed to live. Others prayed to die quickly next time. Both prayers were born of the same despair. Rome liked to tell stories of freed gladiators, awarded wooden swords as symbols of liberty. Such cases were rare enough to become myths. Most died long before dreaming of freedom, and even those who were freed never truly returned to normal life. Their scars, physical and mental, left them forever displaced in the society that once cheered their suffering. Executions were an essential part of the program. Prisoners, rebels, and forbidden believers were sent into the arena not to fight, but to die according to script. Some were torn apart by beasts. Others were burned alive in staged mythological reenactments. Rome turned death into theater and pain into dinner conversation. For emperors, the arena was the perfect political weapon. When the people grew angry over hunger, taxes, or war, the answer was not reform, but bread and circuses. Multi-day spectacles with hundreds of deaths distracted the masses. Each life lost on the sand bought Rome another day without confronting justice. But the arena became insatiable. The crowd demanded more blood, more brutality, greater spectacle. Simple fights no longer sufficed. Rome staged mock wars, recreating the destruction of entire cities. People died not because they lost, but because the script required it. At its moral nadir, the Colosseum was even flooded to stage mock naval battles. Ships collided and sank, dragging men who could not swim beneath the water. The crowd watched from above like indifferent gods. Rome boasted of recreating the world, but in doing so, it shrank its own conscience. Occasionally, a gladiator refused to kill. He stood exhausted, looking up at the stands, silently asking, "Is it enough?" For a brief moment, silence spread. Then a shout, a gesture. The crowd roared again. Rome did not allow hesitation. Mercy was a luxury it could not afford. Behind every spectacle lay an undeniable truth. The arena had become Rome's moral center. It taught that life could be priced, suffering consumed, power proven by deciding who lived and died. A society that accepts these lessons does not ask if it will decline, but when, and that moment was approaching. No civilization collapses overnight. Rome did not either. The Colosseum did not vanish by decree or awaken moral clarity. It faded slowly, like an aging beast losing strength without realizing its time had passed. As Rome expanded too far, it ran out of enemies to capture. The supply of prisoners dwindled. Wars grew costly and unprofitable. Gladiators were no longer foreign warriors, but men born into the system, trained from childhood to become entertainment. Violence was no longer the byproduct of conquest, it was a self-consuming cycle. At the same time, Rome's spiritual world began to change. New ideas spread, especially Christianity, a faith that placed sacred value on every human life. To its followers, the arena was not order, but sin. Rome responded with persecution, throwing believers to beasts. But paradoxically, their quiet, resolute deaths planted doubt. For the first time, spectators left uneasy rather than exhilarated. The arena, once proof of absolute power, began to reveal weakness. As emperors converted and laws shifted, blood sports were restricted, not from sudden compassion, but from desperation for moral cohesion. The games became infrequent. Crowds thinned. Cheers faded into memory. Surviving gladiators became living relics. Some were freed, others died forgotten. Without applause or purpose, they wandered a world that taught them how to kill, but never how to live. As the Western Empire weakened and its treasury emptied, costly spectacles became unsustainable. The Colosseum was stripped for stone. It became a quarry, no longer a center of life and death, but of raw material. The most chilling truth was not abandonment, but forgetting. Later generations saw ruins, not screams. Stones, not blood. Brutality was neutralized into textbooks and tourist guides, and in that neutrality, the lesson risked being lost. The Colosseum is not merely a story of ancient cruelty. It is a warning. Rome did not fall because of the arena, but the arena revealed what Rome was willing to become. When suffering becomes entertainment, decline begins within. Today, the Colosseum still stands. Tourists admire its scale. Few pause long enough to feel what's soaked into its stones. Beneath the sand lie hundreds of thousands of lives. Each wall is history written in blood. Rome believed the arena proved its greatness. History sees it as a mirror reflecting what humanity becomes when power, fear, and pleasure merge. The empire is gone. The emperors are names. But the question remains for every age. When we cheer violence, are we being entertained? Or are we quietly eroding our own humanity? That is the darkest legacy of the Roman Colosseum.